I think in so many ways we can't make sense of the Lucy Letby murders. It just doesn't compute. And maybe that is a way of explaining how she was left in the hospital, demoted from active care to a clerical job, managing hospital security, I think. Extraordinary. So looking at exactly the issues that she was accused of, and presumably chatting with her former colleagues, and yet she was under suspicion even then, for a year, I think, of murder. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And Sir Duncan Nicholl says that although there were concerns, there was no criminal activity pointing to any one individual. There was no people being the NHS Foundation Trust in Chester being misled by hospital executives. And again, it seems to come down to the chaos of the bureaucrats who are dealing with the hospital administration. And I don't understand how we can allow this chaos to continue, with people running our hospitals who don't seem to know what they're doing, and even when someone expresses concern, simply expressing concern should trigger alarm. And yet this seems to have triggered a lingering dismissal, a lingering putting off to another day. And that, I think, is the story which should be headlining at the moment, rather than whether Lucy Letby turns up for her sentencing, which is in some ways that's a lesser story. We know that she is guilty. What we don't know is how that time frame played out, and how many other people simply turned a blind eye, or simply were too overworked, or too indifferent to the problem, or simply didn't have the experience or the knowledge to be able to look at the facts. There's a story about somebody who reviewed the clinical data but didn't have time to assess it. That's really worrying. And is this happening with our own care in hospitals? Certainly, I know that my last 2 visits to a hospital, in fact, the only 2 visits really in my life to a British hospital, were both disastrous. Though I received very good care when I got it, but the bureaucratic system behind it meant that the key bits of care I didn't receive. And in the second case, that meant I was back in hospital again, fixing the damage that they had caused. In the first case, I didn't know the damage was there, and I lived for nearly 10 years with it. And so I couldn't have made any claims against it because the time frame had elapsed. Why would I know there was something deeply wrong inside me because they had made such an error first time round? But it's this casualness, and the fact that the nurses and doctors are so overworked and so underpaid for what they do, and the bureaucrats are busy indifferently moving paperwork around and making decisions about our health, about our care, which is based on just pushing the problem along and assuming that nobody is really going to question their behaviour because we're so dependent at that stage. And in many ways, they're right. We are so dependent when we're in hospital. We accept that care as it is given. We do not challenge it at the time because we are so ill. And I think this has to change. We have to make sure that hospitals are governed by bureaucrats who have real responsibility. I think we need to have less of these bureaucrats, and I think we need to pay them less, because they clearly are not worth the money that they're getting. It's accident upon accident. It's chaos upon chaos. And it's just paperwork. We need to dump most of the paperwork. We need to put it onto a computer. And actually, so much of the real paperwork is delegated to the overworked doctors and nurses anyway. Get rid of that layer of bureaucracy completely, and get rid of that pay structure, which means that somebody in charge of a trust is paid significantly more than a senior consultant. It's absurd. It's insulting. I think it's scandalous.